My little 7-year-old walked up to that noisy, laughter-filled table in her own sparkly gold dress, clutching a tiny gift box. Nobody but me noticed everyone else was busy with their clinking glasses, so I watched her heart pounding. She squared her shoulders, locked eyes with her grandmother, lifted the box and said, "Grandma, Dad said to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." Suddenly everything froze. Forks hovered in mid-air, the carols faded and the whole room went silent. My mother-in-law managed a tight, confused smile like she thought it was a joke until she opened the box. Then she let out a scream that tore through the silence, louder than any gasp or song. People rushed over curious, but I already knew what was inside. Months ago, Travis had prepared that box for the exact moment his mother crossed the line, and today was that day. This little girl had been invisible all evening, lost in a sea of presents. But that tiny box shattered every forced smile holding our family together. When I married Travis, I believed I was joining a big loving family, always loud, close, hosting cookouts, game nights and holiday parties. His mum, Lorraine, was queen of it all, with a voice that could hush the room and an opinion on everything. I wanted her to like me, and she seemed to, at first. Compliments, hugs, dinner, smiles. But soon the comments started. I wasn't like the other women in the family. I didn't share their values. Always just subtle enough to make me doubt myself. Then Zia came along, my daughter from a previous marriage. She was 2 when Travis entered our lives, and he embraced her with all the love and patience a dad could give. When we married, he even adopted her. We never used the word step in our house. Zia was his daughter in every way that mattered, and he was her dad. But Lorraine refused to see it. At first she played along, sending a birthday card or a small holiday gift, but the difference was always there. Zia wasn't invited to cousins' sleepovers or included in the matching Christmas pajamas. While the other grandkids were spoiled, Zia sat quietly, forgotten. Lorraine would call Maddie her little princess, buy Jonah the latest sports gear, then hand Zia a cheap plastic toy or a book she never even looked at. Kids notice these things. I tried to brush it off, telling Zia that Grandma was just forgetful and loved her in her own way. But every year it got harder to lie. One Thanksgiving, Lorraine had personalized plates for each grandchild, except Zia's plate was just an extra from the back of the cabinet. That night, Zia whispered, "Maybe she thinks I'm just visiting." I was speechless. Travis heard it too. I saw his jaw tighten. That was the first time I thought maybe he was starting to understand. Still, we kept going back. I told myself it was for family, unity, for tradition, for Zia to grow up with cousins and holiday memories. I convinced myself that love didn't need matching pajamas or fancy gifts. But deep down, I knew I was lying. I stayed silent because I didn't want to be the problem or force Travis to choose between his mom and me. Every time I swallowed my hurt, I told myself I was doing it for Zia, that being the bigger person would teach her something important. What I didn't see was that I was teaching her to accept being treated as less. Travis and I argued about it more than once in quiet, exhausted conversations after Zia was asleep. He'd admit he saw it, but didn't know how to fix it, didn't want to upset his mom. I'd press him. What about Zia? He'd promised to talk to Lorraine soon, then go quiet again. By that Christmas, I was drained. I'd packed matching outfits, baked extra cookies, wrapped thoughtful presents. I kept telling myself maybe this year will be different, but I wasn't hoping for approval anymore. I was waiting ready for the moment when staying silent wouldn't be kind. That moment came quicker than I thought. I watched Lorraine beam as she handed Maddie a brand new iPad, kissed Jonah before giving him a thick envelope of cash. Then she turned to Zia, handed her a lavender candle and said, "I didn't want you to feel completely left out." I glanced at Travis. He said nothing and didn't even blink, but everything changed in his expression. He hadn't forgotten what he promised Zia months ago. He hadn't forgotten the box, and neither had she. Lorraine's house was picture perfect for the holidays, a towering artificial tree dripping in gold ornaments and twinkling lights, a roaring fireplace, a table set with fine china, and so many wrapped gifts underneath you could barely see the tree skirt. It should have felt magical, but my stomach twisted the moment we stepped inside. Zia led the way, her curls bouncing in that sparkly gold dress she'd chosen herself, clutching the little gift she'd made in art class, a painted wooden trinket box with glued-on rhinestones, and Grandma scrawled in crooked glitter. She beamed with pride, but Lorraine barely looked at her. Instead, she swept Maddie and Jonah into tight hugs, laughing and exclaiming how big they'd gotten. She handed Maddie a little velvet pouch with a wink and whispered, "Don't open this yet, all smiles." Then she turned to Zia, offered a stiff, "Hi, sweetie, you look very festive," glanced at the tiny present in Zia's hands and almost without looking, set it on a side table like it was someone's stray napkin. Zia didn't make a sound. She caught my eye for a moment, then quietly sat on the couch beside Maddie. The kids played quietly while the adults made small talk, and I sat on the edge of it all, watching my daughter fade into the background of what was supposed to be her own family celebration. When it was gift time, Lorraine made it a full ceremony, sitting in her armchair like royalty, calling each child up. Jonah got an envelope stuffed with cash and cheers. Maddie unwrapped an iPad and a real silver and crystal bracelet set, hugging Lorraine so tight the iPad almost slipped. Then, after a long pause, Lorraine called Zia's name, held up a small gift bag and said, "This is for you, sweetheart. I didn't want you to feel left out." Zia walked up and took it. Inside was a lavender-scented candle in a plain glass jar with a tag that read, "To Travis's girl." No note, no toy, no sparkle, just a candle and a tag that felt like a knife. Travis stared at the floor fingers, tightly laced, jaw clenched. Zia sat back down beside me, clutching the candle in her lap. She didn't cry or scowl, but I could see her retreating inside herself, that quiet, lasting hurt a child carries long after the party ends. Lorraine moved on as if nothing happened, handing out more gifts. The rest of us laughed, ate dessert, and toasted with champagne, but I couldn't hear any of it. All I saw was Zia's polite thank you to Lorraine and her half-hearted interest in Maddie's new bracelet. Later in the kitchen, I caught Travis by the shoulder. "You have to say something," I whispered. "She called your daughter Travis's girl, like she's just a guest here." He was silent for a moment, then finally said, "I told Zar to give Grandma the box if this ever happened again." I reminded him it was her choice when she felt ready. "You're serious?" I asked, and he nodded. She remembers. On the drive home, Zia sat in the back seat, clutching her candle. In a small voice, she asked, "Is Grandma mad at me?" I reached back to take her hand, but Travis spoke first. "No, sweetie, Grandma just forgot something important. But I think she's about to remember." Zia looked down at the little red-wrapped box Travis had given her months ago, nodded once and said, "Then I want to give it to her tomorrow." That's when I knew this wouldn't be swept under the rug, like all the times before. It wouldn't be another lesson in patience or polite silence. Something was changing. My daughter was done being invisible. That night, Travis grabbed the leftover cookies from the car, while I helped Zia inside. She held the candle in one hand and the small box in the other, each like a fragile treasure. Though quiet, her face was calm and determined, as if she'd already made up her mind. "Do you want to take a bath or watch a movie before bed?" I asked. She shook her head. "I want to get ready for tomorrow." I hesitated. "What's tomorrow?" She looked at me like I should already know. "Brunch at Grandma's. I'm giving her the box." My breath caught, not from fear, but from the pure certainty in her voice. No hesitation, no doubt, just a decision by a 7-year-old who'd finally had enough. Later, as I brushed her hair, Zia looked up at Travis. "Can I still give it to her?" she asked. He smiled and nodded. "It's your choice, Zar. I told you that from the start." She gave a small, focused smile, nothing like her usual grin when we promised ice cream or a trip to the zoo. It was the smile of a girl who knew the weight of what she carried and was ready to be heard. After Zia was asleep, I turned to Travis and asked, "What exactly did you put in that box?" He sank into a chair across from me at the kitchen table, looking like he'd been holding back a storm. A few months back, he began, I was watching Zia play with Maddie at Jonah's birthday party in the backyard. Lorraine called everyone inside for cake. Maddie and Jonah got slices piled high with frosting and sprinkles, and Zia got the sad end piece plain and undecorated. That night she came up to me and asked if she was really part of this family too. He paused and took a deep breath. When we got home, I sat down and wrote a letter. I printed another copy of her adoption papers and packed it in that little red box. I told Zah she could hand it to my mum if she ever made her feel like she didn't belong again. My throat tightened. "And you never told me," I whispered. He shook his head. "I didn't want to make it a fight or drag you into another argument about my family, but I needed Zah to know I saw what happened, and I wanted her to feel she had something solid to stand on. I'd spent years hoping Travis would stand up waiting for him to draw a line. Instead, he did it quietly by giving our daughter the power to say, 'Enough.'" The next morning, Zia got ready like it was picture day, sparkly dress, perfect curls, the same glitter headband she wore when Travis signed her adoption papers. In the car, she held that red box in her lap with both hands completely calm. When we pulled up to Lorraine's house, everything looked exactly the same, the wreath, the smell of cinnamon and ham, the polite greetings and empty compliments. But something felt different. We weren't visitors trying to fit in. We were a family walking in with our truth. Zia sat quietly through brunch box in hand, ready for what came next. She hardly touched her plate as everyone else finished their meal. Lorraine praised Maddie's dress 3 times but didn't say a word about Zia's. When dessert arrived and plates were being passed around, Zia quietly stood up. Nobody noticed at first. Then in one smooth move, she walked straight to the head of the table where Lorraine sat, set the little red box in front of her and said, "Grandma, Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." The room went dead silent. Lorraine laughed nervously. "What's this, sweetheart?" Zia didn't say another word. She simply stepped back and sat down. Travis squeezed my hand under the table, his grip tight. Lorraine picked up the box as if expecting a prank, turning it over in her hands with that half smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everyone was watching now. Travis's sister frowned, Maddie stared, and Jonah kept munching his cookie clueless. Slowly Lorraine peeled back the red paper. Her smile vanished the moment she lifted the lid. Inside was a white framed photo of Travis in a hospital chair, holding tiny Zia on her 2nd birthday cake, smeared on her cheeks, arms wrapped around his neck. Under the photo in gold script were the words, "Day 1, Dad." Beneath that lay a sealed envelope. Her hands shook as she tore it open. The first document was Zia's adoption papers signed by a judge, with Travis's name clearly printed under father and the official court seal at the bottom. Lorraine's eyes welled as she blinked hard, almost hoping the words would change if she looked again. Next, she unfolded a letter in Travis's handwriting. He didn't flinch as Lorraine began to read, but I felt his hand tighten on mine. Lorraine's lips trembled as she read, her face growing pale with every line. The letter began, "Mom, if you're reading this, it means you hurt my daughter again, not just by love, but by law, promise, and choice. I watched you treat Zia like an outsider, and I hoped you'd change. I hoped you'd open your heart like I did. But if she's handing you this box, it means you still don't see her as real. Zia is my child, your granddaughter, and if you can't love her equally, you don't love me. I won't let her grow up thinking she has to earn her place. She already belongs, always has. If you can't accept that you're no longer welcome in our home or our lives, Travis." When Lorraine finished, she dropped the letter on the table as if it burned her fingers. She looked around stunned as though expecting someone to rescue her, but the room was deathly quiet. Then something inside her snapped and she let out a raw, piercing scream like all her carefully crafted pretenses had been torn away in an instant. Her chair scraped the floor as she jumped up. Maddie flinched. Jonah froze and Lorraine's sister reached out to steady the table, but Lorraine recoiled, muttering, "I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this." At last Travis stood. "We didn't embarrass you," he said calmly. "You did that all by yourself." Lorraine pointed at me, her voice shaking. "This is her doing. This girl turned you against your own mother." I rose to my feet too, my voice steady. "Zia gave you a gift," I said. "She gave you the chance to truly see her, and you chose not to." For a moment, the only sound was the fireplace crackling. Zia sat quietly watching, not scared or confused, just quietly witnessing the truth. Travis turned to her and held out his hand. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded and stood. I grabbed our coats and helped her into hers. No one tried to stop us or say goodbye. Together, me, my husband and our daughter, we walked out, leaving behind the perfect decorations, the flawless centerpieces, and the empty approval that had never really been ours. In the car, Zia clicked her seatbelt into place and stared out the window in silence. After a moment, she asked softly, "Do you think she read the whole letter?" Travis checked the rearview mirror and nodded. Every single word he said. Zia gave a small, satisfied smile, not a victory grin, just enough to show she felt something shift inside. Not because Grandma had suddenly changed her mind, but because Zia realized she didn't need her approval anymore. We never went back to Lorraine's house after that day. No more birthday parties, no more forced family gatherings, no more pretending everything was fine. There were no angry texts or tearful phone calls, just silence. She didn't reach out, and neither did we. For the first time, we found peace. I half expected Zia to ask questions or feel sad, but instead she seemed free. She stopped watching doors at holiday dinners. She stopped wondering why she didn't get the same gifts or why her name was left off craft projects. She stopped measuring her worth by someone else's behavior. Something inside her had changed for good. About a week after Christmas, a small padded envelope arrived, and it was for Zia. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm, along with a note from Maddie. "I'm sorry Grandma was mean. You're my cousin forever. I spent my allowance on this just for you." Zia read it twice, then slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. She didn't ask if she could wear it every day, she just did. That simple gesture meant more to her than a dozen expensive gifts ever could. It reminded me that kids don't need perfection. They need to feel chosen, seen, and valued. And Travis changed too. He'd carried the guilt of being stuck between his mom and his daughter for years, trying to bridge two worlds that would never truly meet. But after that brunch, I saw relief in his eyes. He'd made his choice. He chose Zia without apology, without condition, and without regret. One night I peeked in and found Travis sitting on the edge of Zia's bed, just watching her sleep. When she stirred, he looked at me and said softly, "I should have done it sooner." I squeezed his hand and told him, "You acted exactly when she needed you to." After that, we began new traditions, small, slow, and intentional. Zia helped us decorate cookies for neighbours. We built pillow forts, wore matching pyjamas, and watched movies. We didn't try to replace what was broken. We focused on building what was real. People talk about cutting off toxic family like it's simple, like you draw a line and move on. It isn't. It hurts even when it's necessary. But what hurts more is seeing your child shrink to make room for someone else's comfort. I refuse to let that happen again. I won't ask my daughter to accept less because someone else won't give more. That day at Lorraine's table wasn't about drama or revenge. It was about Zia claiming her space in a room where she'd always been treated like a guest. It was her saying, "I belong here," even when someone tried to make her feel she didn't. And it was Travis and me finally standing behind her with more than words. Zia never talks about the box anymore. She doesn't need to. but I keep it in my bedroom drawer next to her first baby shoes and her hospital bracelet. Not to remember the pain, but to remember the strength it took for her, for us. She's only 7, but she taught me something I'll carry forever. Family isn't about loud displays or shared blood. It's who shows up when it matters, who protects you, when it's hard, who makes you feel safe when the rest of the world makes you feel small. Zia has that now, not because someone gave it to her, but because she claimed it. And in doing that, she gave it to us, too. Pass this on to anyone who needs to know they're not alone. Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and your story matters here. If you want more true moments that change everything, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths.